The stagecoach arrived on a Tuesday, 3 hours late, and caked in enough dust to choke a horse. Ethan Hale stood at the edge of Coldwater's main street with his hat pulled low, watching the crowd gather like vultures to a carcass. They always did this. Came out to gawk at whatever poor soul tumbled off the westbound stage, desperate enough or stupid enough to think Montana Territory held something better than whatever they'd left behind. He wasn't here for the show. He was here because 6 months ago, drunk on rotgut whiskey and lonelier than he'd admit, he'd answered an advertisement in the matrimonial news. 3 letters later, he'd sent payment to a Mrs. Greta Hollis in St. Louis, a widow, the broker promised, seasoned and sturdy, 30 years old with homesteading experience, the kind of woman who could handle mountain winters, who wouldn't expect poetry or tender words, who understood that marriage on the frontier was about survival, not romance. The brake lever screamed, the coach lurched to a stop, and the driver, a grizzled man named Petey with tobacco-stained teeth, hopped down and spat in the dirt. "Mail run," Petey announced, hauling bags from the boot. 2 passengers. One getting off here, one going through to Helena. Ethan's pulse kicked up despite himself. Somewhere in that coach was Greta Hollis. His wife, legally speaking, though they'd never laid eyes on each other. The arrangement was common enough out here, practical, clean, no illusions about love. The door swung open. A man in a wool suit emerged first, stepping down with the careful movements of someone who'd spent too long cramped in a box. He nodded at no one in particular and headed toward the hotel without a backward glance. Then came the girl. She appeared in the doorway like an apparition, clutching the frame with white knuckles. For a moment she just stood there, backlit by the harsh afternoon sun, and Ethan's first thought was that she'd gotten on the wrong coach. Had to be. Couldn't be. She was young. Couldn't be more than 16, 17 at most. Round face, soft with baby fat that hadn't burned off yet. Dark hair pulled back in a braid that had come half undone during the journey. And big. Not tall, barely 5'3", but heavy in a way that made the coach springs creak when she shifted her weight. The crowd went silent. Then someone laughed. It started as a snicker from old Jim Brennan outside the hardware store, but it spread like wildfire. Within seconds, half the street was howling. Women whispered behind their hands. Men slapped their thighs. Even the kids playing in the alley stopped to point. "That's her?" someone called out. "That's Hale's mail-order bride?" "Thought he ordered a woman, not a Christmas ham." More laughter, louder now, cruel. The girl, Clara, her name was Clara Voss, he remembered from the letters, froze in the doorway. Her face went from pale to crimson in the span of a heartbeat. Those brown eyes swept across the crowd, taking in the mockery, the disgust, the sheer entertainment value of her existence. Ethan felt something twist in his chest. Anger, maybe, or recognition. He knew that look, had worn it himself years ago. Petey cleared his throat, uncomfortable now that the joke wasn't funny anymore. "Miss, you need help with your trunk?" Clara didn't move, didn't speak. She just stood there like a deer that had walked into a wolf pack and only just realized what was happening. "Come on, sweetheart," Brennan hollered. "Don't keep your husband waiting. He paid good money for you." That got another wave of laughter. Someone made a pig sound. A woman muttered something about false advertising loud enough to carry. Ethan's hands curled into fists. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't wanted a scene, hadn't wanted attention, hadn't wanted anything except someone capable and quiet who could share the work and the silence of mountain life. The arrangement was supposed to be simple, businesslike. This was a disaster. The smart move would be to walk away. Get his money back from the broker, send the girl back on the next coach east, cut his losses. Everyone would talk for a week or two, but they'd forget. They always did. He took a step backward. Clara's eyes found his across the dusty street. There was no pleading in that gaze, no desperate hope that he'd save her, just a flat, exhausted acceptance that she'd been weighed, measured, and found wanting. Again. Probably not the first time. Definitely wouldn't be the last. She'd already started to retreat back into the coach when Ethan's feet betrayed him. He didn't decide to move. His body just did it, crossing the street in 5 long strides, boots kicking up dust. Ignoring the sudden hush that fell over the crowd, he reached the coach and extended his hand up toward her. "Clara Voss?" She blinked at him. Up close, she was younger than he'd thought, fresh bruises on her wrists barely visible beneath her sleeves, old scars on her knuckles, the kind of marks you got from hard labor or harder treatment. Yes. Her voice came out scratchy, underused. I'm Clara, but I think there's been some kind of mistake, Ethan finished. No mistake. That was a lie. This was absolutely, categorically a mistake. But something in her expression, that hollow resignation, that expectation of abandonment, made the words stick in his throat. The crowd pressed closer, sensing drama. Hale, you can't be serious, the sheriff called out. Mike Dalton, decent enough man, but weak when it came to standing against popular opinion. Look at her. That broker swindled you. Everyone can see it. I can see just fine, Ethan said. He kept his hand extended. Clara stared at it like it might be a trap. Ethan, that was Pastor Morris, voice dripping with false concern. Son, you don't have to go through with this. The contract was for a widow of specific specifications. This is clearly fraud. We can help you sort it out legally. Send the girl back where she came from. Where I came from doesn't want me back, Clara said suddenly. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Nobody wants me anywhere. The brutal honesty of it cut through the laughter. For a second, even Brennan shut his mouth. Ethan looked at her, really looked. Saw the threadbare dress that had been mended a dozen times. The shoes with holes worn through the soles. The way she held herself like she was trying to take up less space, to shrink into invisibility. He'd been 17 once, orphaned, angry, with nowhere to go and no one to want him there. He remembered what that felt like, the weight of it. What's it going to be? He asked her. Not the crowd. Her. Clara swallowed hard. What do you mean? You want to get back on that coach? I'll pay your fare. No questions, no trouble. Or you can come with me. Your choice. Why? The word came out broken. You don't even know me, and I'm not what you paid for. No, Ethan agreed. You're not. The crowd murmured. This was it. The moment he'd tell her to leave, confirm what everyone already knew, that she was unwanted, unacceptable, wrong. Ethan pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. 34 years old, and he'd spent the last 12 of them alone in a mountain cabin, speaking to no one except his horse and the occasional trader. He'd convinced himself he didn't need people, didn't want their judgment or their pity or their company. But he remembered being young and desperate, remembered what it cost to have doors slammed in your face over and over until you stopped knocking. Here's the truth, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I'm not an easy man. I live 15 miles up a mountain where winter lasts 8 months and the closest neighbor is a 3-hour ride. The work is brutal, the cabin's small. I don't talk much and I don't suffer fools. Clara's expression didn't change. She'd heard versions of this speech before, he realized. The prelude to rejection. But I made a contract, Ethan continued, and I keep my word. The papers say you're my wife. Far as I'm concerned, that's what you are. Anyone has a problem with it can take it up with me directly. He extended his hand again. The street had gone dead silent. Clara looked at his hand, at the crowd, at the coach behind her, door still open, escape still possible. Her breathing came fast and shallow, chest rising and falling beneath the worn fabric of her dress. I can't cook very well, she whispered. And I'm not the kind of wife men want. I'm not the kind of husband women want either, Ethan said. We'll figure it out. For a long moment, nothing happened. The wind picked up, sending dust devils spinning down the empty street. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Then Clara put her hand in his. The crowd exploded. You're making a mistake, Hale. She'll eat you out of house and home. Give it a week. She'll be begging to leave. Ethan ignored them. He helped Clara down from the coach, her weight solid and real in his grip. She stumbled on the last step, those worn shoes catching on the iron footrest, and he steadied her without comment. Trunk? He asked. Just the one. Her voice was barely audible. The small brown one. Petey had already unloaded it, setting it in the dirt with more force than necessary. Ethan picked it up, lighter than expected, containing probably everything Clara owned in the world, and gestured toward the general store. Need to get some supplies. You can wait with the wagon or come in. I'll come. Quick, decisive, like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let him out of her sight. They walked down the street together, Ethan carrying the trunk under one arm. The crowd parted like he was contagious. Whispers followed them, vicious and delighted. This'll be the scandal of the year. Poor fool doesn't know what he's gotten himself into. She won't last a month up there. Inside the general store, the owner, a pinched woman named Mrs. Hartwell, looked up from her ledger and her expression soured immediately. Mr. Hale, wasn't expecting you in town today. Need supplies, flour, salt, coffee, dried beans, the usual. He set Clara's trunk down by the door. And fabric. Whatever you've got that's sturdy. Mrs. Hartwell's eyes slid to Clara, who'd positioned herself in the corner like she was trying to melt into the wallpaper. Fabric, I see. For her? For my wife. Yes. The word wife hung in the air like a challenge. Mrs. Hartwell's lips pressed into a thin line, but she knew better than to argue with a paying customer. I'll get your items together. It'll be a few minutes. Take your time. Ethan turned to find Clara examining a display of canned peaches like they were the most fascinating thing she'd ever seen. Her hands were shaking. You all right? He asked quietly. Why did you do that? She didn't look at him. Out there, in front of everyone. You could have sent me back quietly. Nobody would have blamed you. I know. So why? Ethan pulled out a chair from the small table Mrs. Hartwell kept for customers and sat down heavily. Exhaustion was creeping in now that the adrenaline was fading. You ever make a choice just because it was the right thing to do, even if it was stupid? No. Clara's honesty was refreshing. I've never been in a position to make choices. That tracked. He studied her profile, the soft curve of her jaw, the way her teeth worried at her bottom lip. She couldn't be more than 16, maybe younger. How old are you? Truth. 16 and 4 months. She finally met his eyes. The broker said it didn't matter, said I looked older and nobody would ask questions if I didn't volunteer information. The broker lied about a lot of things, I'm guessing. Yes. Her voice dropped even lower. I'm sorry. I know you were expecting someone different, someone better. I tried to tell Mrs. Anderson, she's the one who arranged everything. I tried to tell her this was a bad idea, but she said beggars can't be choosers, and I should be grateful anyone would take me at all. Anger flashed hot in Ethan's chest. Not at Clara, at the faceless broker, at Mrs. Anderson, at whoever had put those words in this girl's mouth and made her believe them. You got family back east? He asked. No, nobody. My parents died when I was 9, cholera. I've been in a workhouse in St. Louis since then. Mrs. Anderson runs it. She brokers marriages on the side. It's how she keeps costs down. Gets girls off her hands and makes money doing it. A workhouse. That explained the bruises, the scars, the way Clara flinched when Mrs. Hartwell dropped a bag of flour too loudly on the counter. The contract said you had homesteading experience. Clara's laugh was bitter. I can scrub floors and haul laundry and work 16 hours without complaining. That's my experience. I've never seen a homestead in my life. Never cooked on anything except a workhouse stove. Never been outside a city until 3 days ago. Ethan rubbed his face. This was worse than he thought. He'd needed a partner who could handle herself in the wilderness, someone who knew which plants were edible and how to dress a deer and when to worry about the weather turning. Instead, he'd gotten a traumatized teenager who'd probably never spent a night outside in her life. Can you ride a horse? He asked. No. Shoot a gun? No. Start a fire without matches? I don't think so. Skin a rabbit? Clara's face went pale. No, I'm sorry. I know I'm useless. I know this is... Stop. Ethan held up a hand. I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm taking inventory, figuring out what we're working with. We? You're coming home with me, aren't you? Claire stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. You still want me to come? Even though I can't do anything? Everyone can do something. You just haven't found your something yet. Ethan stood and stretched, his back popping. Here's the deal. It's a hard life up there. I won't lie to you about that. Winter's coming in another month and it's brutal. The cabin's small. One room, barely enough space for two people. You'll have to learn fast, work hard, probably hate me half the time. I don't hate easily, Clara said softly. Good. Because I'm grumpy, antisocial, and I forget to be polite. I'll push you harder than you've been pushed before. But I won't hit you, won't starve you, won't sell you off or trade you away. You do the work, pull your weight, and we'll get through the winter together. Come spring, if you want to leave, I'll take you to Helena and pay your way wherever you want to go. Deal? Clara's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back furiously. Why are you being kind to me? I'm not being kind, I'm being practical. I need help up there and you need a place to be. It's an arrangement. Ethan pulled out his wallet and counted bills for Mrs. Hartwell. But I keep my word. Always have. So if I say you're my wife, you're my wife. And if anyone gives you trouble about it, they're giving me trouble. Understand? Clara's voice broke. She cleared her throat and tried again. I understand. Thank you. I'll work hard, I promise. I won't be a burden. Everybody's a burden sometimes. That's what partnership means. Mrs. Hartwell returned with the supplies, loading them into a crate with sharp, disapproving movements. She'd selected the cheapest fabric, rough brown cotton that would chafe like hell but would last through hard wear. Ethan paid without haggling and carried the crate out to his wagon. Clara followed, still moving like she expected the ground to open up beneath her. The wagon was nothing fancy, just a flatbed with wooden sides, pulled by a sturdy mare named Sadie, who'd carried Ethan through worse than a supply run. He loaded the crate, then Clara's trunk, then turned to find her staring up at the wagon seat like it was a mountain she'd have to climb. You need help up? He asked. Pride flashed across her face, brief and quickly buried. No, I can manage. She couldn't, really. The step was too high and her dress was too long and her arms shook with the effort. But she hauled herself up through sheer determination, breathing hard by the time she settled onto the bench. Ethan climbed up beside her and took the reins. Sadie snorted, ready to go. One more stop, he said. Then we leave. Where? Sheriff's office. Clara went rigid. Why? Did you change your mind? Are you… Relax. Just need to file the marriage certificate. Make it legal. Otherwise, you're not protected. Protected from what? Ethan clicked his tongue and Sadie started forward. From people who'd say you don't belong here. That you're just some girl, not a wife, not entitled to anything. Paperwork matters on the frontier. Proves your right to be where you are. They rode in silence to the sheriff's office. A small building at the end of the street with bars on the windows and bullet holes in the door from some long-ago dispute. Ethan tied Sadie to the post and helped Clara down, noting how she wavered on her feet. When's the last time you ate? He asked. Yesterday morning, maybe. I don't remember. Christ. Wait here. He strode back to the general store and returned with a paper-wrapped sandwich and a canteen of water. Clara took them with trembling hands and ate like she was afraid someone would snatch the food away. Quick, furtive bites, barely chewing. Slow down. You'll make yourself sick. She didn't slow down, just finished the sandwich in 4 bites and drained half the canteen. Inside the sheriff's office, Mike Dalton sat behind his desk looking uncomfortable. Ethan, didn't expect to see you again today. Need to file the marriage certificate. You're serious about this. When am I not serious? Dalton sighed and pulled out the necessary forms. You know people are going to talk. Let them. It's not that simple. You're making yourself a target, making her a target. There are folks in this town who don't like disruption. What they like isn't my concern. Ethan filled out the forms with quick, precise strokes. Name, age, occupation. He hesitated at Clara's information. Your full legal name? Clara Marie Voss. He wrote it down. Birthday? November 3rd, 1867. Jesus, she really was just 16. Ethan swallowed his unease and finished the paperwork. Witnesses? Dalton grimaced. I can witness. Need one more. I'll do it. Pastor Morris appeared in the doorway, looking solemn. If you're determined to go through with this farce. It's not a farce, Ethan said flatly. It's a marriage, legal and binding. Morris signed where indicated, his movements stiff with disapproval. You're condemning this child to a hard life, Hale. You know that. She already had a hard life. At least this one comes with a roof and food. And what happens when winter sets in and she can't handle it? When she realizes what she's gotten herself into? Clara spoke up then, her voice stronger than before. I can handle more than you think, Pastor. Morris looked at her with something like pity. Child, you don't know what you're agreeing to. No, Clara agreed, but I know what I'm leaving behind, and anything's better than that. The words hung heavy in the small office. Even Morris didn't have a response. Dalton stamped the certificate and handed it to Ethan. It's official. You two are married in the eyes of the law. For whatever that's worth. It's worth everything, Ethan said. He folded the certificate carefully and tucked it into his coat pocket. Come on, Clara. We're done here. They walked back to the wagon through streets that had grown hostile. People didn't laugh now. They glared, whispered. One woman spat in the dirt as they passed. Clara kept her head down, shoulders hunched. Ethan kept his head up, meeting every hostile gaze with a flat, unblinking stare that had made smarter men back down. He helped Clara into the wagon and climbed up beside her. The sun was starting its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of copper and blood. Last chance, he said quietly. You can still change your mind. I'll find you a place to stay tonight. Put you on tomorrow's coach east. Clara looked at him with those dark, serious eyes. Will you change your mind? No. Then I won't either. Ethan clicked his tongue, and Sadie started forward, pulling them away from Coldwater and toward the mountains. Clara sat rigid beside him, hands clenched in her lap, watching the town disappear behind them. They rode for an hour in silence, the road gradually climbing into pine forest. The temperature dropped as they gained elevation. Clara shivered in her thin dress. Ethan pulled a blanket from behind the seat and draped it over her shoulders without comment. She pulled it tight, still shaking. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. Wait till you see where we're going. Is it really that bad? Depends on what you consider bad. Ethan guided Sadie around a fallen log. It's isolated, cold. There's no neighbors, no visitors, no social calls. Just you, me, and about 10,000 acres of wilderness. Some people find that peaceful. Others go crazy within a month. I like quiet, Clara said. At the workhouse, it was always loud. Crying babies, women fighting, Mrs. Anderson shouting orders. I used to dream about silence. You'll get plenty of that. They climbed higher. The forest thickened, pine trees pressing close on either side of the narrow road. A deer bounded across their path, white tail flashing. Clara gasped, actually gasped, like she'd never seen wildlife before. That was beautiful, she breathed. Ethan glanced at her. For the first time since stepping off that stagecoach, she didn't look afraid. She looked awake, present, like something had sparked to life behind those dark eyes. You'll see plenty of deer, he said. Elk, too. Bears, if you're unlucky. Mountain lions, if you're really unlucky. Are you trying to scare me? I'm trying to prepare you. There's a difference. The wagon crested a ridge, and suddenly the view opened up. Mountains rolling away in every direction, peaks still capped with last year's snow, valleys dark with forest. The sky had gone purple-pink with sunset, clouds catching fire above the highest ridges. Clara made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. Oh. I didn't know places like this existed. I thought the whole world was buildings and smoke and noise. Tears ran down her face, but she was smiling, actually smiling. It's so big. Too big for some people. Makes them feel small. I already feel small. Clara wiped her face with the back of her hand. But this makes me feel like maybe small isn't the same as nothing. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Just kept Sadie moving forward as the last light faded and stars began to prick the darkening sky. By the time they reached the cabin, full dark had fallen. Ethan lit a lantern and Clara got her first look at what would be her home. It wasn't much. One room, maybe 20 feet square, built from hand-hewn logs with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. A narrow bed in the corner, a table with 2 chairs, shelves holding supplies, a small stove for cooking, windows shuttered tight against the cold, Clara stood in the doorway, taking it all in. Her face was unreadable. I know it's not, Ethan started. It's perfect, Clara said quietly. It's the first place that's ever been mine. Ours, Ethan corrected. It's ours now. He showed her around, where the water barrel sat, how to work the stove, where he kept the food stores. Clara absorbed everything with intense focus, like she was memorizing each detail. You can have the bed, Ethan said, gesturing to the narrow cot. I'll sleep on the floor. That's not fair. You're bigger. You need... I've slept on worse than a good floor. It's fine. Clara opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Exhaustion was written in every line of her body. All right, thank you. Ethan built up the fire while Clara changed behind a blanket he'd hung for privacy. When she emerged, she was wearing a nightdress that had been white once but was now gray with age and washing. It hung loose on her frame, donated probably from someone's cast-offs. She climbed into the bed and pulled the blankets up to her chin. Her eyes were already drooping. Mr. Hale? She murmured. Ethan. Just Ethan. Ethan. She tested the name. Why did you really do it? Take me with you? You could have walked away. Should have walked away. Ethan stared into the fire, watching the flames dance. I spent 3 years in an orphanage when I was your age, after my parents died. I remember what it felt like, being somewhere nobody wanted you, being told you should be grateful for scraps. He poked at the logs, sending sparks spiraling up. I swore if I ever had the power to change that for someone, I would. So I did. Silence. When he looked over, Clara's eyes were closed, her breathing deep and even. Asleep within seconds, the way only the truly exhausted could sleep. And somehow, despite everything, that didn't feel as wrong as it should have. Clara woke to the sound of an axe biting into wood. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling above her was rough-hewn logs instead of water-stained plaster. The air smelled like pine and smoke instead of unwashed bodies and lye soap. The bed beneath her was narrow but clean, the blankets heavy and warm. Then it came rushing back. The stagecoach, the town, the laughter. Ethan Hale's hand extended toward her like a lifeline she had no right to grab. She sat up too fast and her vision swam. The cabin was empty, morning light streaming through gaps in the shutters. The fire had burned down to embers. Her breath misted in the cold air. Outside, the rhythmic thunk of the axe continued. Clara climbed out of bed, her feet hitting the cold floor with a shock that made her gasp. She found her dress, wrinkled and dust-stained from yesterday, and pulled it on with fumbling fingers. Her stomach cramped with hunger. When had she last eaten a real meal? 2 days ago? 3? She pushed open the cabin door and stepped into a world transformed. Mountains rose in every direction, their peaks sharp against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Pine trees stretched as far as she could see, their needles dark green and silver-tipped with frost. The air was thin and crisp, tasting of ice and wood smoke and something wild she couldn't name. Ethan stood near a large pile of logs, axe raised. He brought it down with controlled force, splitting a round of wood clean through. He'd taken off his coat despite the cold, working in just his shirt and vest, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He glanced over when the door creaked. "You're up." "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sleep so long." "It's barely past dawn. That's not long." He set another log on the chopping block. "There's coffee on the stove, bread in the tin. Help yourself." Clara's stomach twisted at the mention of food, but she hesitated. Is there something I should be doing? Chores or eating? That's what you should be doing." The axe came down again. "Can't work on an empty stomach." She retreated into the cabin and found the coffee pot still warm on the stove. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but she drank it anyway, feeling the heat spread through her chest. The bread was dense and dark, spread with some kind of berry preserve. She ate slowly this time, forcing herself to chew, to taste. Through the window, she watched Ethan work. He moved with the economy of someone who'd done this 10,000 times, never wasting emotion. The pile of split wood grew steadily. When she finished eating, Clara washed her tin cup and plate in the basin, using water from the barrel near the door. Then she stood in the middle of the small cabin, unsure what came next. The door swung open and Ethan came in, bringing a blast of cold air with him. He hung his coat on a peg and rolled down his sleeves. "We need to talk." Clara's chest tightened. Here it was. He'd had the night to think it over, to realize what a mistake he'd made. "All right." Ethan pulled out a chair and sat, gesturing for her to do the same. She sat, hands clasped tight in her lap. "Winter's coming fast," he said. "Maybe 3 weeks before the first real snow. Once that happens, we're locked in here until spring. No going to town, no supplies, no help if something goes wrong. Everything we need to survive the next 6 months has to be ready before then." Clara nodded, though her heart was sinking. She knew where this was going. "That means I need to work twice as hard as usual to get everything done," Ethan continued. "And I can't do it alone. Not and have time to teach you what you need to know. I understand you want me to leave before the snow comes." Ethan's eyebrows rose. "What? No. Where'd you get that idea? You just said—" "I said I need help. That means you're going to work. Starting today." He stood and pulled open a trunk she hadn't noticed before, extracting a pair of heavy wool pants and a thick flannel shirt. "These were mine when I was younger. They'll be big on you, but better than that dress. Can't haul wood in a skirt." Clara stared at the clothes. "You want me to wear men's clothing? I want you to wear practical clothing. Nobody up here to scandalize except the deer." He tossed the bundle to her. "Change. We're burning daylight." She caught the clothes reflexively. They smelled like cedar and storage. "What am I going to do?" "Today, learn to haul water, chop kindling, and not die of stupidity in the woods." Ethan pulled on his coat. "Tomorrow we'll work on basic tracking and fire starting. Day after that, shooting. We've got 3 weeks to turn you into someone who can survive up here. No time to waste." Clara's hand shook as she held the clothes. "What if I can't learn fast enough?" "Then you'll learn slower, and we'll make do." Ethan opened the door. 5 minutes. Then we start." He left her alone to change. Clara stripped out of her dress with trembling fingers and pulled on the pants. They were huge. She had to roll the waist twice and stuff rags in to keep them up. The shirt hung to her knees, but they were warm, warmer than anything she'd ever worn. She caught sight of herself in the small mirror near the wash basin and barely recognized what she saw. Hair wild from sleep, cheeks pink from the cold, drowning in men's clothes that made her look even younger and rounder than she was. But there was something else too, something in her eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. A spark. Small and fragile, but alive. Outside, Ethan waited by the woodpile. He looked her over and nodded once. "Good enough. See these?" He pointed to several buckets lined up near the cabin. "Water runs out fast when you're cooking and cleaning. There's a spring about 200 yards that way." He pointed downhill through the trees. "Paths marked with white stones. You'll make that walk 20 times a day by winter's end." Clara eyed the buckets dubiously. They looked heavy, even empty. "Start with 1, Ethan said, reading her expression. "Work up to 2. Don't try to prove anything. You'll just hurt yourself and then you're useless to both of us." He handed her a bucket and gestured down the path. Clara took it and started walking, acutely aware of him watching. The path was steep and rocky, winding between massive pines. Roots crossed it like tripwires. She stumbled twice in the first 50 yards. The spring bubbled up from between moss-covered rocks, clear and ice-cold. Clara filled the bucket, surprised by how quickly the weight increased. By the time it was full, she could barely lift it. The walk back up was agony. Her arms burned, her shoulders screamed, water sloshed over the sides, soaking her pants. Halfway up, she had to stop and rest, gasping for breath in the thin air. "Don't lock your elbows," Ethan called from the cabin. "Bend your knees, use your legs." Clara adjusted her grip and tried again. It helped, barely. By the time she reached the cabin, she'd spilled half the water and her whole body was shaking. "Again," Ethan said. "What?" "We need 6 full buckets minimum. You've got 1 half full. Again." The second trip was worse. The third was torture. By the fourth, Clara's hands were cramping so badly she could barely hold the bucket. Tears leaked down her face, but she didn't stop, couldn't stop. If she stopped, if she proved she couldn't do this, he'd send her away. On the 5th trip, she fell. Her foot caught on a root and she went down hard, the bucket flying from her hands. Water splashed everywhere. Pain lanced through her knee where it hit a rock. She lay there for a moment, breathing hard, tasting blood where she'd bitten her tongue. Every muscle in her body screamed. She wanted to stay down, wanted to curl up and give up and admit defeat. Then she heard boots crunching on the path. Ethan appeared above her, hand extended. "You hurt?" "No." Her voice came out choked. "Let me see your knee." "It's fine." "Clara, let me see it." She pulled up her pant leg. Blood seeped through a tear in the fabric. The skin beneath was scraped raw. Ethan knelt and examined it with efficient movements. "Not deep. Needs cleaning, though. Come on." He helped her up and she bit back a whimper when weight hit her injured leg. He noticed, of course he noticed, but didn't comment. Just kept a steadying hand on her elbow as they walked back to the cabin. Inside, he sat her down and retrieved a small box from a shelf. Medical supplies, she realized. He wet a cloth and cleaned the wound, his touch surprisingly gentle despite his rough hands. "This'll sting," he warned, then applied something that burned like liquid fire. Clara hissed through her teeth but didn't pull away. "You don't have to prove yourself in one day," Ethan said, wrapping a strip of clean cloth around her knee. "Pace matters up here. Work too hard too fast and you'll injure yourself. Then you're no good to anyone." "I can do it. I just need to—" "You need to learn the difference between pushing yourself and breaking yourself. There is a difference." He tied off the bandage and sat back. "You've got soft city hands and no muscle. That doesn't change in a day or a week. It takes time." Clara stared at her hands, pale and useless in her lap. "How much time?" "Depends on how fast you learn. Some things come quick, others take months." Ethan stood and moved to the stove, pouring coffee into 2 cups. He handed her one. "You know what matters more than strength up here?" "What?" "Not being stupid, not panicking, paying attention." He sat across from her. "Strength you can build, but if you're the kind of person who ignores warning signs or takes foolish risks or gives up when things get hard, that'll kill you faster than weakness. I won't give up. You fell down and got right back up to finish the job. That tells me something." Ethan took a long drink of coffee. "But you also tried to hide an injury and keep working. That tells me something else." Clara's face heated. You thought I'd throw you out for being hurt, or weak, or not good enough." His eyes were steady on hers. "I'm going to say this once, so listen. I don't abandon people. Not when they're trying, not when they're hurt, not when things get difficult. You pull your weight to the best of your ability, you'll have a place here. That's the deal. Understand?" Something in Clara's chest cracked open. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good. Now rest that knee for an hour, then we'll work on kindling." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of exhaustion and small victories. Clara learned to haul water without spilling half of it. Learned to split kindling with a hatchet, to stack wood so it stayed dry, to bank a fire so it lasted through the night. Her hands blistered, then calloused. Her arms stopped shaking when she lifted the buckets. Ethan taught her to recognize animal tracks: deer, elk, bear, mountain lion. Showed her which plants were edible and which would kill her. Taught her to read the sky for coming weather, to find north without a compass, to move quietly through the forest. Every evening he'd quiz her while they ate dinner. "What do you do if you see a bear?" "Make myself big. Make noise. Back away slowly. Don't run." "Why not run?" "Because it triggers their chase instinct, and they're faster than me." "Good. What about a mountain lion?" "Fight back. Go for the eyes. Don't play dead." The lessons were relentless. But so was Ethan's patience. When she forgot something, he explained it again. When she made mistakes, and she made plenty, he showed her how to fix them without making her feel stupid. It was strange having someone invest time in teaching her. At the workhouse, mistakes meant punishment. Here, they meant correction and another chance. On the 10th day, Ethan handed her a rifle. "Ever held a gun?" he asked. "No." "Today you learn." He walked her through the basics: how to load it, how to aim, how to breathe through the shot. The first time she pulled the trigger, the recoil knocked her back a step and the bullet went wide by 3 feet. "Again," Ethan said. By the end of the afternoon, she could hit a tree trunk from 50 paces. Not consistently, but often enough. "You'll get better with practice," Ethan said, taking the rifle back. "But you're not hopeless." Coming from him, that was practically a compliment. The work was hard, but it had rhythm, structure. Every day, Clara woke knowing what needed to be done, and every night she fell into bed with the bone-deep satisfaction of having done it. Her body was changing, muscles developing where there had been only soft flesh before. She could see it in the way the borrowed pants fit better now, in the strength of her grip when she carried water. But more than that, something inside her was changing too. The constant fear that had lived in her chest for years was fading, replaced by something that felt almost like purpose. On the 14th night, the first snow came. Clara woke to find the world transformed. White covered everything, muffling sound, making the familiar landscape alien and beautiful. She stood at the window watching fat flakes drift down, mesmerized. "It'll get worse," Ethan said from behind her. He was already dressed, stoking the fire. "This is just a warning. The real storms won't start for another week or two." "How long will it last?" "This one? Maybe a day. The winter," he shrugged. "Until it doesn't." Clara turned from the window. In the firelight, Ethan looked older than his 34 years, tired. There were lines around his eyes she hadn't noticed before. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You just did." "Why do you live up here? Alone?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he poured coffee for both of them and sat at the table. "Started coming up here after the war. Needed space from people. From noise. From questions I didn't want to answer." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that don't have good answers." He stared into his cup. "After a while, I realized I preferred the solitude. Mountains don't judge. Don't expect things from you. Don't care if you're broken." "You don't seem broken." "That's because you didn't know me before." Ethan took a drink. "Lost my parents when I was 15, lost my brother at Shiloh, lost pieces of myself I won't get back. By the time the war ended, there wasn't much left worth saving, so I came here and stopped trying." Clara sat across from him. "Is that why you never married before? The mail order arrangement?" "Partly. Also because no woman in her right mind would choose this life if she had other options." He gave her a look that might have been apologetic. "I'm not easy to live with, I know that. I'm moody, antisocial, forget to talk for days at a time, can't offer comfort or poetry or tender feelings, just hard work and isolation." "I don't need poetry," Clara said quietly, "and I like the quiet. At the workhouse, noise was constant, crying, shouting, the sound of fists hitting flesh. Here it's just wind and birds and the fire crackling. It's the first peace I've ever known." Ethan studied her face. "You never talk about your parents, what you remember." "Not much. I was 9 when they died. My father worked on the docks. My mother took in sewing. We lived in 2 rooms above a bakery. I remember the smell of bread, and my mother singing while she worked." Clara wrapped her hands around her cup, seeking its warmth. "Then the cholera came. They died within 3 days of each other. I went to the orphanage, then the workhouse when I turned 12. 4 years there? 4 years of scrubbing floors until my knees bled, washing other people's filth, being told I was lucky to have a roof and meals, even if the roof leaked and the meals were mostly water." Her voice stayed flat, emotionless. She'd learned years ago that showing feeling only made things worse. Mrs. Anderson sold girls as wives when she could. It was profitable. She'd lie about our ages, our skills, whatever the buyer wanted to hear. Most of us were just desperate to leave. "Did you know what you were agreeing to when you got on that stagecoach?" "No. She showed me the contract, but I can't read very well, just enough to recognize my name. She said you were a good man who needed a wife, that Montana was beautiful, that I'd have a better life." Clara's laugh was bitter. "I didn't believe her, but I figured even if it was terrible, it couldn't be worse than staying. And now? Now I'm not sure what to think. You're not what I expected. This," she gestured at the cabin, the mountains beyond the window, "isn't what I expected. I keep waiting for it to be a trick, for you to show your real face." "This is my real face," Ethan said. "Grumpy and honest. What you see is what you get. That's what scares me. Nobody's this decent without wanting something. I want someone who'll pull their weight and not die on me over the winter, that's all. Clara wanted to believe him, but 4 years in a workhouse had taught her that kindness always came with a price. Men, especially, didn't do things out of goodness. They wanted payment, usually in ways that made her skin crawl. But Ethan hadn't touched her, hadn't looked at her with that particular hunger she'd learned to recognize in men's eyes. He slept on the floor without complaint, gave her privacy when she needed it, treated her like a working partner instead of property. It was unsettling. "You're thinking too loud," Ethan said. "I can hear it from here." "Sorry." "Don't apologize. Just tell me what's eating at you." Clara bit her lip, then decided to risk it. "Why haven't you... we're married, legally. You have rights, but you haven't... touched you?" Ethan's voice was flat. "Because you're 16 years old and terrified. Because I'm not that kind of man. And because whatever this arrangement is, it's not that. Will never be that." Relief flooded through her, so intense it left her dizzy. "Thank you." "Don't thank me for basic decency. Bar's too low if that's something to be grateful for." He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the falling snow. "You're safe here, Clara. From me, from the elements, from whoever or whatever you left behind. That's the promise. Everything else we'll figure out as we go." Before Clara could respond, something crashed outside. They both froze. "What was that?" Clara whispered. Ethan grabbed the rifle from its place above the door and moved to the window. "Stay inside." "What is it?" "Don't know yet." He slipped out into the snow. Clara watched from the window, heart hammering. Minutes passed. Then Ethan reappeared, dragging something large and dark. A deer, dead, throat torn open. He wrestled it onto the porch and came inside, shutting the door against the cold. Blood stained his hands and coat. "Mountain lion," he said shortly. "Made a kill near the woodpile. We need to process this meat and get it stored before the cat comes back for it. Now? Now. Welcome to mountain life. Nothing happens on schedule." They worked through the afternoon, Ethan showing Clara how to skin and butcher the carcass. It was brutal, bloody work. Clara's stomach turned at first, but Ethan's matter-of-fact instructions kept her focused. "Can't afford to waste anything," he explained, separating muscle from bone with practiced efficiency. "This deer will feed us for weeks. The hide makes leather, the bones make tools. Even the organs have use." Clara's hand shook as she helped, but she didn't stop, didn't look away. This was survival. This was the price of eating through winter. By evening, they had meat wrapped and hanging in the cold storage shed Ethan had dug into the hillside. The hide was stretched for tanning. The bones were boiled clean. Clara washed blood from her hands in a basin, watching pink water swirl down. Her fingers were raw from the cold. Her back ached from bending, and she smelled like death. "You did good today," Ethan said, washing his own hands beside her. "Better than I expected. I almost threw up twice. But you didn't. That's what matters." He dried his hands on a rag. "First time's always the hardest. Gets easier." "Does it get less horrible?" "No, but you get better at living with horrible." Ethan hung the rag to dry. "That's survival, not avoiding the bad things, but learning to function through them anyway." That night, Clara lay in bed listening to wind howl around the cabin. Snow piled against the windows. The temperature dropped until frost formed on the inside of the glass. But the fire kept burning. The cabin stayed warm. And somewhere in the darkness, Ethan's steady breathing reminded her she wasn't alone. For the first time in her life, Clara fell asleep feeling something that might have been hope. The next morning brought a rider. Clara heard the horse before she saw it, hoofbeats muffled by snow but distinct. She was outside hauling water when the man appeared through the trees. He rode a fine black gelding and wore a coat that cost more than everything Clara had ever owned combined. Clean-shaven, with slicked-back hair, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning," he called, tipping his hat. "I'm looking for Ethan Hale." Clara froze, bucket in hand. Something about this man made her skin crawl. Ethan emerged from the cabin, rifle in hand, but pointed down. "I'm Hale. State your business." The man dismounted with practiced ease. "Victor Crow, Railroad Company. I'm here about a matter of some urgency." His eyes slid to Clara. "Concerning your recent acquisition." Clara's blood went cold. "My wife, Ethan said, voice hard. Not an acquisition. Ah, of course. Crow's smile widened. There seems to be some confusion. You see, Clara Voss was sold under contract to settle debts owed by the charitable women's workhouse of St. Louis. That contract predates any marriage arrangement you may have made. The hell are you talking about? Crow pulled papers from his coat. I represent certain financial interests that provided loans to Mrs. Anderson's institution. When those loans went unpaid, collateral was seized, including human assets. Human assets. Ethan's voice could have cut glass. You mean people. I mean contractual obligations. Miss Voss was indentured to cover institutional debts. She had no legal right to enter marriage without prior release from said indenture. Crow's eyes were cold despite his pleasant tone. I'm afraid your marriage is invalid, Mr. Hale, and I'm here to collect what's owed. Clara's legs went weak. The bucket slipped from her hands, water splashing across the snow. Ethan stepped between her and Crow, rifle still in hand. You're not taking her anywhere. I have legal documentation, sir. Would you like to examine it? I don't care what papers you have. She's staying here. Then I'm afraid we have a problem. Crow's smile never wavered. One that will require resolution through proper legal channels. I'll be filing a claim in Coldwater within the week. I suggest you find yourself a lawyer, Mr. Hale. You're going to need one. He mounted his horse and rode back down the mountain, leaving them standing in the snow. Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This was it. The trick. The catch. The price she'd always known would come due. Clara, Ethan's hand on her shoulder grounded her. Look at me. She met his eyes. We're not done fighting, he said. You understand? This isn't over. He has papers, legal claims. You're my wife. That's legal too. And I'll burn down every courthouse in Montana before I let some railroad vulture take you. Ethan's jaw was set, his eyes fierce. We go to town. We fight this. Together. Clara wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that this fragile thing they'd built could withstand what was coming. But she'd learned long ago that wanting something didn't make it real. They left for Coldwater before dawn the next morning, the wagon loaded with supplies they didn't need except as an excuse for the trip. Clara sat rigid beside Ethan, watching her breath mist in the freezing air. Neither of them had slept. They'd spent the night going through every piece of paper Ethan owned. The marriage certificate, the letters from the broker, receipts from the payment he'd sent. It won't be enough, Clara had said around midnight, her voice hollow. Men like Crow don't show up unless they know they can win. Then we make sure he can't. Ethan had folded the documents with careful precision and tucked them into his coat. One way or another. Now, as Sadie pulled them down the mountain road, Clara couldn't stop the spiral of thoughts. She'd been property before, at the orphanage, at the workhouse, traded and sold and used like livestock. For 3 weeks, she'd let herself believe that was over. That maybe, impossibly, she'd found something different. She should have known better. Stop, Ethan said. Clara blinked. What? Stop thinking yourself into a hole. I can see it happening. He kept his eyes on the road. We don't know what we're dealing with yet. Crow could be bluffing. Those papers might be forgeries. Hell, he might not even file a claim. He'll file. Men like him always do. Clara pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. And even if the papers are fake, he can afford better lawyers than we can. He works for the railroad. They own half the territory. They don't own me, and they sure as hell don't own you. The law might say different. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You remember what I told you about not being stupid up here? About paying attention to warning signs? Yes. Same applies to people. Crow showing up the way he did. Unannounced, alone, with a smile that oily. That's a warning sign. He's testing us. Seeing if we'll fold without a fight. Ethan guided Sadie around a fallen branch. Men like him count on people being too scared or too poor to push back. But I'm not scared, and I've got enough saved to hire a lawyer if it comes to that. Clara wanted to feel reassured, but she'd seen too many fights lost before they started. What if it's not enough? Then we figure something else out. But we don't quit before the fight even begins. The town appeared through the trees just after noon, looking smaller and meaner than Clara remembered. The street was mostly empty, too cold for casual loitering. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin gray columns. Ethan pulled the wagon up to the lawyer's office, a narrow building squeezed between the dry goods store and a barber shop. The sign out front read Thomas J. Brennan, attorney at law, in faded gold letters. Any relation to the hardware store, Brennan? Clara asked. His brother, but Thomas is less of an ass. Usually. Inside, the office was cramped and cluttered with law books and files stacked on every surface. A clerk sat at a desk near the door, a young man with ink-stained fingers and wire-rimmed spectacles that kept sliding down his nose. "Help you?" he asked, not looking up from whatever he was writing. "Need to see Brennan," Ethan said. "It's urgent." "Mr. Brennan is with a client. You'll have to—" "It's fine, David." A door opened and Thomas Brennan emerged, a tall man with graying hair and shrewd eyes. He was maybe 50, with the kind of face that had seen too much to be easily surprised. "Ethan Hale. Wasn't expecting you back in town so soon." "Didn't plan on it. We have a problem." Brennan's gaze shifted to Clara, and something flickered across his expression. Recognition, maybe, or pity. "Come in. David, hold my appointments." They followed him into a small office lined with more books. Brennan settled behind his desk and gestured for them to sit. "I assume this is about the girl?" "My wife," Ethan corrected. "Her name's Clara." "Apologies, your wife." Brennan pulled out a notebook. "What's the problem?" Ethan explained about Crow's visit, the claims of prior indenture, the threat of legal action. As he talked, Brennan's expression grew darker. "Victor Crow," Brennan said when Ethan finished. "I know him. Railroad's pet lawyer. Sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous. If he's involved, there's money behind this. Significant money." Clara's stomach sank. "Can they actually do this?" Ethan asked. "Take her based on some supposed debt?" "Depends on whether the documentation is legitimate. Indenture contracts are legal in some circumstances. Orphanages and workhouses do use them to recoup costs. But they have strict requirements." Brennan tapped his pen against the desk. "The contract would need to be signed by Clara herself or by a legal guardian if she was underage. It would need to specify terms, duration, and conditions for release, and it would need to have been recorded with the appropriate authorities." "I never signed anything," Clara said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Mrs. Anderson handled everything. I just got on the stagecoach." "Did you sign any papers at all before you left St. Louis?" Clara tried to remember. The last few days at the workhouse were a blur of preparation and fear. I think so. Mrs. Anderson had me mark an X on something. She said it was just confirming my travel arrangements." Brennan and Ethan exchanged a look. "That could be a problem," Brennan said carefully. "If she had you sign an indenture contract without explaining what it was—" "That's fraud," Ethan interrupted. "She can't trick someone into signing away their freedom. Proving fraud is difficult, especially against someone who's not here to testify." Brennan made a note. "We'd need to demonstrate coercion, lack of understanding, or procedural violations. None of which is easy when the person who arranged it is halfway across the country." Clara felt the walls closing in. "So Crow wins. He takes me back." "I didn't say that." Brennan leaned forward. "I said it's difficult, not impossible. We have some advantages. First, you're married now. That's a legal status that grants certain protections. Second, you're not in St. Louis anymore. You're in Montana territory where different laws apply. Third, we can challenge the validity of the original contract on multiple grounds." "But," Ethan prompted, hearing what Brennan wasn't saying. "But Crow isn't stupid. If he's making this move, he believes he can win, which means he has documentation we haven't seen yet, evidence we don't know about." Brennan sat back. "This is going to be a fight, and fights cost money. I'll need a retainer to get started. $200 minimum." Clara heard Ethan's sharp intake of breath. $200 was probably half of what he had saved, maybe more. "I'll get it," Ethan said. "Ethan, no." Clara turned to him. "That's too much. It's not worth—" "Don't." His voice was hard. "Don't finish that sentence. You're worth a hell of a lot more than $200. We do this properly or not at all." Brennan watched them with an expression Clara couldn't read. I'll need to see any documents you have. The marriage certificate, letters from the broker, anything that establishes your relationship and her legal status. Ethan pulled the packet from his coat and handed it over. Brennan examined each paper carefully, making occasional notes. This helps, he said finally. The marriage certificate is properly filed and witnessed. The letters show a clear intent to marry. But Crow will argue that Clara had no legal right to enter into marriage while under indenture, that the contract is void because she wasn't free to make it. So what do we do? Clara asked. We prepare for court. Crow will file his claim with Judge Whitmore, probably within the week. We'll file a counterclaim asserting Clara's right to self-determination and challenging the validity of the indenture. Then we go before the judge and make our case. Brennan folded his hands. I'll be honest with you both. This isn't going to be pleasant. Crow will dig up everything he can about Clara's past, about your marriage, about anything that makes either of you look questionable. He'll paint you as a naive fool who got swindled, Ethan, and Clara as a runaway debtor with no legal standing. The whole town will be watching. Let them watch, Ethan said. Easy to say now. Harder when you're sitting in that courtroom listening to them tear apart your life. Brennan looked at Clara. Are you prepared for that? To have strangers judge every choice you've ever made? Clara thought about the workhouse, the years of being told she was worthless, unwanted, a burden, the daily humiliations, the casual cruelties. They've been judging me my whole life, she said quietly. At least this time I have someone on my side. Brennan studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, I'll take your case. Bring me the retainer by tomorrow and I'll start building our defense. They left the office to find snow falling again, thicker than before. The street was still mostly empty, but Clara could feel eyes on them from windows and doorways. Word had spread. It always did in small towns. We need to talk to Sheriff Dalton, Ethan said, pulling his hat lower. Make sure he knows what's happening. Crow strikes me as the type who'd try to enforce his claim without waiting for a court ruling. They found Dalton in his office, warming his hands over a small stove. He looked up when they entered and his expression turned wary. Ethan, Mrs. Hale. He stood slowly, like a man anticipating trouble. What can I do for you? You heard about Victor Crow? Ethan asked. Hard not to. He made sure to introduce himself around town yesterday. Very friendly, very official. Dalton's tone suggested he was neither. Said he'd be filing papers with the judge, didn't say what kind. He's claiming Clara was sold to him under indenture, says our marriage is invalid. Dalton's jaw tightened. I witnessed that marriage certificate myself. I know, and we're fighting this through legal channels, but I need to know, if Crow tries to take her before the judge rules, will you stop him? The sheriff's hesitation was answer enough. Mike, Ethan said, voice low and dangerous. Will you stop him? It's not that simple. If he has legitimate papers, if you let him take her without a court order, you're breaking the law. She's legally married. That means she has rights. I'm aware of the law, Ethan, but I'm also aware that the railroad has deep pockets and long reach. If I interfere with their business without solid legal standing, so you'll just let him kidnap a married woman? Don't put words in my mouth. Dalton's face reddened. I'll uphold the law. Whatever the judge decides, that's what I'll enforce. Until then, technically, she's under your protection. But if Crow gets a legal order, we'll cross that bridge if we come to it. Ethan grabbed Clara's arm and steered her toward the door. Outside, Clara's hands were shaking. He won't help us. He'll help himself. That's all men like Dalton ever do. Ethan looked up and down the street. We need supplies, food, ammunition, anything we might need if we have to hole up for a while. You think Crow will come for me? I think men who work for the railroad don't like waiting for courts. Ethan started toward the general store, then stopped. Actually, you should wait in the wagon. Fewer people staring at you that way. But Clara shook her head. No, I'm done hiding. If they're going to talk about me, they can do it to my face. Something like approval flickered in Ethan's eyes. All right then, stay close. The general store was busier than it had been on their first visit. Conversations died when they walked in. Mrs. Hartwell stood behind the counter, her expression pinched with disapproval that had calcified into something harder. Mr. Hale, she said coldly, I wasn't aware you were in town. Need supplies. Ethan pulled out a list. Coffee, flour, salt, dried meat, ammunition for a Winchester, the usual. Mrs. Hartwell's eyes slid to Clara. I heard there's some question about your arrangement. No question. Clara's my wife. The certificate's filed with the sheriff. So I heard. I also heard the railroad has other ideas. Mrs. Hartwell began gathering items with sharp, aggressive movements. Seems there's a debt to be settled, a legal matter. Legal matters get settled in court, Ethan said evenly. Until then, nothing's changed. A woman Clara didn't recognize spoke up from near the fabric display. Seems to me a man ought to know what he's buying before he pays for it. You got swindled, Mr. Hale. No shame in admitting it. I got exactly what I needed, Ethan replied. A wife who works hard and doesn't complain, more than most men can say. Working hard won't change what she is, another voice added. Property, sold to cover debts. That's legal, signed and binding. Clara felt heat rising in her face. These people didn't know her, didn't know anything about what she'd survived, what she'd learned, what she'd become in 3 weeks on that mountain. I'm not property, she said, her voice cut through the whispers. I'm a person, and I choose to be here. Choice isn't yours to make, girl, Mrs. Hartwell said. Not when you're bought and paid for. Nobody bought me. Clara stepped forward, surprising herself with her own boldness. Mrs. Anderson lied. She forged documents, made false claims, sent me here under pretenses. Whatever contract exists, I never agreed to it, never understood it, never had a choice in it. Convenient story, someone muttered. It's the truth. Clara's hands clenched into fists. But I don't expect you to believe me. None of you wanted to see me as anything except a joke from the moment I stepped off that stagecoach. Fat girl, stupid girl, wrong girl, that's all I was to you. The store had gone completely silent. But Ethan saw something different. He gave me a chance when nobody else would, taught me things I never knew, treated me like I mattered. Clara's voice shook, but she kept going. So if you want to stand there and tell me I don't have the right to choose my own life, go ahead. But I'm done apologizing for existing, and I'm done letting people like you make me feel small. Mrs. Hartwell's face had gone rigid with shock. Several other customers looked away, uncomfortable. Ethan's hand found Clara's shoulder. We done here? He asked Mrs. Hartwell. The shopkeeper finished loading their supplies in silence, her movements mechanical. Ethan paid, and they carried the boxes to the wagon, leaving a wake of whispers behind them. Once they were outside, Clara's legs went weak. She leaned against the wagon, breathing hard. That was stupid, she said. I shouldn't have. That was honest. Ethan loaded the last box. And about time someone said it. Now they'll all hate me more. They were going to hate you anyway. At least now they know you've got a spine. He helped her up onto the wagon seat. Takes courage to stand up in front of hostile people and speak truth. Most folks don't have it. Clara wanted to believe him, but her hands were still shaking as Ethan drove them to the hotel where they'd spend the night. He rented a room with 2 beds, paying extra for privacy and a lock on the door. Stay here, he said once they'd brought their things up. I'm going to talk to a few people, see what I can learn about Crow. Lock the door behind me. Ethan, lock it, Clara. Don't open it for anyone except me. I'll knock 3 times, pause, then twice more. That's the signal. Understand? She nodded, fear creeping back now that the adrenaline from the store was fading. Ethan left and she locked the door behind him, then pushed a chair under the handle for good measure. The room was small and cold despite the fire in the grate. Clara sat on one of the beds and tried to stop shaking. Everything felt too big, too fast. 3 weeks ago she'd had nothing. No choices, no future, no hope. Now she had something fragile and new and terrifying in its importance, and Crow was going to take it away. A knock came at the door maybe an hour later. Not Ethan's signal. Clara froze. Mrs. Hale? A woman's voice, unfamiliar. I need to speak with you. It's important. Clara didn't answer, didn't move. Please, I'm not here to hurt you. I have information about Victor Crow, information you need. Clara crept to the door. Who are you? My name is Margaret Sloan. I worked for the railroad until last year when Crow had me fired. A pause. I know what he does, how he operates. If you want to fight him, You need to hear what I have to say." Every instinct screamed not to open the door. This could be a trap, a trick to get her alone, vulnerable. But if this woman really did know something about Crow... Clara opened the door a crack, keeping the chain latched. A woman stood in the hallway, maybe 40, dressed in a worn but respectable coat. Her face was lined with fatigue and something that looked like anger held under tight control. "You have 2 minutes," Clara said. "Talk." Crow specializes in debt collection for the railroad. They buy up old contracts, loan documents, anything with an unpaid balance. Then he hunts down the debtors and squeezes them for payment or collateral. Margaret's voice was matter-of-fact. "He's done this dozens of times. Orphanages, poorhouses, immigrant families, anyone vulnerable who can't fight back." "Why?" "Because it's profitable. The railroad gets cheap labor or cash settlements. Crow gets bonuses for every contract he enforces, and nobody cares because the people he targets don't matter to anyone." Clara's hands went cold. "How do you know all this?" "I was his clerk. Kept his books, filed his papers. I saw every dirty deal he made." Margaret's jaw tightened. "Then I saw him go after a family I knew. Good people who'd borrowed money to bury their daughter. He took their son instead, claimed the boy was collateral under the loan. Sold him to a mining company." "That's evil?" "Yes. Also legal if you have the right paperwork and a judge who looks the other way." Margaret glanced down the hallway. "I tried to speak up. Crow had me fired and blacklisted. Haven't worked since." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm tired of watching him win, and because you're the first person I've seen actually fight back." Margaret pulled an envelope from her pocket. "These are copies of some of his old contracts, cases he's filed, patterns in how he operates. It's not much, but maybe your lawyer can use it." Clara took the envelope through the crack in the door. "Why should I trust you?" "You shouldn't. Trust is stupid when dealing with people like Crow. But I'm not asking for trust. I'm giving you information. What you do with it is your choice." Margaret started to turn away, then stopped. "One more thing. Crow doesn't just win in court. He wins before it gets there. Intimidation, threats, making people's lives hell until they give up and settle. Watch your back. And don't trust Sheriff Dalton. Crow's already bought him dinner twice." She walked away down the hall, footsteps fading. Clara locked the door again and examined the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were pages of cramped handwriting, dates, names, case summaries, all in Margaret's neat script. When Ethan returned an hour later with the proper knock, Clara showed him everything. He read through the pages with growing anger, his jaw working. "This son of a bitch," he muttered. "He's done this to at least 20 people, maybe more. Margaret said he wins before it gets to court, by making people give up." "Then we don't give up." Ethan folded the papers carefully. "We take this to Brennan tomorrow. It's not smoking gun evidence, but it shows pattern and practice. Might be enough to make the judge look closer at Crow's claims." "Ethan," Claire's voice was small, "what if it's not enough?" He looked at her across the dim room, firelight casting shadows on his face. "Then we try something else. And if that doesn't work, we try again. We keep trying until we win or until there's nothing left to try. And if there's nothing left, there's always something left, even if it's just getting on Sadie and riding somewhere Crow can't follow." Ethan's eyes were hard. "I meant what I said. I don't abandon people. Not when they're fighting, not when things get dark. So stop looking for reasons I'll give up on you because you won't find any." Clara blinked back tears. "I don't know how to believe that." "Then don't believe it. Just watch. See what I do instead of what I say." He moved to the second bed and sat down heavily. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we give Brennan this information and figure out our next move." But sleep was impossible. Clara lay in the dark listening to the sounds of the town outside. Horses in the street, voices from the saloon, the distant whistle of a train. That train could take her anywhere. East, west, somewhere new where nobody knew her story. She could run, disappear before Crow made his next move. It would be easier for Ethan that way. No fight, no legal fees, no reputation destroyed defending someone who wasn't worth it. "You're thinking too loud again," Ethan said from across the room. Clara startled. "I thought you were asleep." Hard to sleep when I can hear someone planning to do something stupid. I'm not. You're thinking about running. I can practically hear the wheels turning. Ethan's voice was calm in the darkness, wondering if it would be easier for everyone if you just vanished. Clara didn't deny it. Here's the thing, Ethan continued. Easy and right aren't the same thing. Running would be easy. Staying and fighting is right. And I didn't raise you these past 3 weeks to watch you choose easy over right when it matters. You didn't raise me. You taught me some survival skills. Same thing. I invested time, effort, and patience in making you stronger, in showing you that you're worth fighting for. Running now means all that was wasted, and I don't waste things. Claire's throat tightened. What if we lose? What if Crow wins and I get taken anyway? Then we tried. We stood up and said no when it would have been easier to lie down. That matters, Clara. Even if we lose, it matters that we fought. I don't want to lose you. The words slipped out before she could stop them. This place, this life, it's the first thing that's ever felt like home. The first time I've ever felt like maybe I could be someone other than what people told me I was. Then fight for it. Not for me. I can take care of myself. Fight for you, for the person you're becoming, for the right to choose your own damn life instead of letting others choose it for you. Silence stretched between them, filled with the crackle of dying fire. I'm scared, Claire whispered. Good. Means you're paying attention. Fear's not the problem. It's what you do with it that matters. Ethan shifted in his bed. You can let it paralyze you, or you can let it sharpen you. Make you careful, smart, ready. That's your choice. Clara closed her eyes. Tomorrow they'd take Margaret's information to Brennan, start building their defense, prepare for whatever came next. But tonight, in this small room with Ethan steady breathing across the darkness, she made a different choice. She chose to stop running, to stop apologizing, to stop being small. Whatever happened in that courtroom, whatever Crow threw at them, she'd face it standing up. Because Ethan was right. Easy and right weren't the same thing. And for the first time in her life, Clara Voss was going to choose right. Morning came too fast and too cold. Clara woke to find Ethan already dressed, counting bills onto the small table by the window. The pile looked painfully thin in the gray dawn light. That's everything? She asked, sitting up. Close enough. 200 for Brennan, plus extra for supplies and another week in town if we need it. He folded the remaining bills and tucked them into his coat. Won't have much left after, but we'll manage. Clara watched him stack the coins with precise movements, his face unreadable. 12 years of savings, probably. Everything he'd put away for emergencies or old age or whatever future he'd imagined for himself, now gone because of her. I could work, she said. Find something in town to help pay. Nobody's going to hire you while this is hanging over your head. And I'm not having you scrub floors for pennies while Crow's circling. Ethan pocketed the money. This is my choice. Let me make it. They ate a quick breakfast in the hotel dining room, ignoring the stares and whispers from other guests. Clara forced down eggs and bread that tasted like sawdust, her stomach too knotted to properly register food. Brennan's office was busier this morning. 2 other clients waited in the front room, a married couple arguing in hushed voices about something involving a property line. The clerk, David, looked even more harried than yesterday. Mr. Brennan's running behind, he said apologetically. Could be an hour wait. We'll wait. Ethan settled into a chair with the patience of someone who'd spent years sitting in mountain silence. Clara couldn't sit. She paced the small room looking at law books whose titles meant nothing to her until Ethan caught her wrist. You're making David nervous. Sit down. She sat, picked at a loose thread on her coat, watched the minute hand crawl around the clock face on the wall. Finally, Brennan's door opened and the couple emerged, still arguing. Brennan looked tired, rubbing his eyes beneath his spectacles. Ethan, Mrs. Hale, come in. They filed into his office. Clara handed over Margaret's envelope before even sitting down. A woman came to see me last night, Margaret Sloan. She said she used to work for Crow and gave me these. Brennan's eyebrows rose. He opened the envelope and began reading, his expression shifting from curious to grim as he worked through the pages. Margaret Sloan, he murmured. I remember her. She tried to bring evidence against Crow last year, but it went nowhere. The railroad has too much influence. He set the papers down carefully. This is good. Better than good. It shows a pattern of exploitation. If we can get even one of these old cases to testify. Will they? Ethan asked. If Crow crushed them before? Probably not. Most of these people either settled or disappeared. But the pattern itself matters. It undermines Crow's credibility. Brennan made notes on a fresh page. Combined with the irregularities in Clara's situation, her age, the lack of proper explanation of the contract terms, the broker's misrepresentations, we have grounds to challenge the indenture's validity. When's the hearing? Clara asked. Crow filed his claim yesterday afternoon. Judge Whitmore set the hearing for 3 days from now, Friday at 10 in the morning. Brennan looked up. That's fast. Unusually fast. Whitmore must be under pressure to resolve this quickly. Pressure from who? Ethan's voice was flat. From whoever's bankrolling Crow's operation. The railroad wants this settled before it becomes a bigger story. Before people start asking uncomfortable questions about how many others have been caught in the same trap. Clara felt sick. So they'll rush it through. Make sure Crow wins before anyone can organize opposition. That's the plan. But we're not going to let them. Brennan pulled out fresh paper and began writing. Here's what we do. I'll file our counterclaim today, arguing that the indenture contract is fraudulent and unenforceable. We'll request a full examination of the contract's origins, including testimony from Mrs. Anderson if she can be compelled to appear. She won't come, Clara said. She's too far away and she has no reason to help. Then we subpoena her written records, force her to produce documentation of how the contract was executed, who signed what, when Clara was informed of the terms. Brennan was writing faster now. We also depose Crow, make him explain on record how he acquired this contract, what due diligence he performed, whether he verified Clara's understanding of what she was signing. Ethan leaned forward. Will the judge allow all that in 3 days? Probably not, but asking for it puts pressure on Crow to prove his claims legitimately instead of just waving papers around. Brennan finished writing and looked up. The truth is, most of these cases settle because the victims can't afford to fight and don't know their rights. You two are fighting. That changes the equation. Crow's going to realize he can't just steamroll you, and he'll either have to produce real evidence or back down. And if he has real evidence? Clara asked quietly. Brennan met her eyes. Then we argue that a contract signed under duress by a minor who didn't understand its terms is void as a matter of public policy. That no civilized society should allow people to be bought and sold like livestock. That Clara has demonstrated her desire for freedom and her ability to build a new life, and the court should honor that. You think that'll work? I think it's the best shot we have. Brennan's voice softened. Look, I'll be honest. Judge Whitmore is not known for his progressive views. He's old, set in his ways, and he doesn't like controversy. If Crow has legitimate documentation and can prove the contract was properly executed, Whitmore might rule in his favor just to avoid making waves. Clara's chest tightened. So we might lose anyway. We might, but we're going to fight like hell to make sure we don't. Brennan stood and extended his hand to Ethan. Bring me that retainer and I'll get started immediately. We have 3 days to build a case that'll make Whitmore think twice about handing you over to the railroad. Ethan counted out the bills and handed them over. Clara watched her future being purchased in worn paper and tarnished coins, wondering if it would be enough. Outside, the sky had darkened with the promise of more snow. The street was busy now with morning traffic, wagons hauling goods, men heading to work, women with market baskets. What do we do now? Clara asked. We prepare, and we wait. Ethan started toward the general store. Need to pick up a few more things. Then we head back to the cabin until Friday. We're leaving town? You want to stay here with everyone watching, waiting for Crow to make another move? Ethan shook his head. We're safer on the mountain. At least there we control the ground. They spent the next hour gathering supplies and loading the wagon. Clara kept expecting Crow to appear to make some new threat or demand. But he stayed invisible, which somehow felt worse. The ride back up the mountain was quiet. Snow began falling around noon, thick flakes that stuck to everything. By the time they reached the cabin, a fresh white blanket covered the world. Ethan unloaded the wagon while Clara started a fire. The familiar routine was comforting. Wood in the stove, coffee on to boil, checking the food stores. Normal tasks that made her feel less like someone whose entire existence was being debated in legal offices. "Ethan," she said as they ate a late lunch of bread and dried meat. What happens if we win? After the court rules in our favor?" He looked up from his plate. "What do you mean?" "I mean, then what? We go back to how things were before? Living up here, pretending to be married?" Clara twisted her hands in her lap. "I know this isn't a real marriage. You made that clear. But legally, it is. And if the court upholds it, we're stuck with each other." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You think being stuck with me is a bad thing? I think you didn't sign up for a real wife. You signed up for a business arrangement, someone to help with chores and share the work. That's all." "That was all," Ethan corrected. "Past tense. Things change." Clara's heart kicked against her ribs. "What do you mean?" "I mean these past 3 weeks, watching you learn and grow and refuse to quit even when everything was hard. That changed things." He met her eyes. "You're not what I expected. And this arrangement isn't what I expected. But that doesn't make it bad. So what is it? Honest? Real? Built on something stronger than romance or pretty words?" Ethan pushed his plate aside. "I respect you, Clara. Respect what you've become and what you're still becoming. That's more than most married couples can say. Respect isn't love. No, but it's a better foundation than love. Love fades. Respect, if you build it right, gets stronger." He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the falling snow. "I'm not a man who knows how to speak tender feelings. Never have been. But I know how to keep my word. And I gave you my word that you'd have a place here as long as you wanted it. That hasn't changed, won't change, regardless of what happens in that courtroom." Clara wanted to say something, but her throat was too tight. She settled for nodding, even though he wasn't looking at her. The next 2 days crawled by. They fell into their routine, Clara hauling water and splitting kindling, Ethan checking traps and maintaining equipment. But tension hung over everything, making normal tasks feel surreal. On Thursday evening, as Clara was washing dishes, Ethan appeared with the rifle and a box of ammunition. "Time for target practice," he said. "Now? It's almost dark." "Best time. Things go wrong in low light. Need to know you can handle it." They walked out to the clearing where Ethan had set up targets against a hillside. The temperature had dropped with the sunset, Clara's breath misting as she took the rifle he handed her. "Remember the basics," Ethan said. "Sight, alignment, breath control, squeeze, not pull." Clara raised the rifle, feeling its weight settle into her shoulder. The target was a piece of wood with a painted circle, maybe 75 yards away. She sighted down the barrel, controlled her breathing, and squeezed. The shot cracked through the cold air. The bullet hit low and left, kicking up snow. Again. She reloaded and fired. Closer this time. Better, again. By the 10th shot, she was hitting the outer ring consistently. Not perfect, but not terrible either. "Why are we really doing this?" Clara asked, lowering the rifle. "You don't actually think Crow's going to come up here with guns, do you?" "I think Crow's going to do whatever serves his interests. If the court rules against him and he's already invested time and money in this claim, he might decide legal methods are too slow." Ethan took the rifle and checked it over. "I'm not saying it'll happen, but if it does, I want you able to defend yourself. I can barely hit a stationary target in good light. I'm not going to be able to shoot a person. You don't know that until the moment comes, and I'd rather you have the skill and not need it than need it and not have it." He handed the rifle back. 10 more shots. Then we're done." Clara fired until her shoulder ached and her ears rang. By the last shot, she was hitting the center ring more often than not. "Good enough," Ethan said. "You won't win any competitions, but you can make someone think twice about coming at you." They walked back to the cabin through deepening darkness. Inside, Ethan heated water for Clara to wash, then hung a blanket for privacy while she changed into her nightdress. When she emerged, he was sitting at the table cleaning the rifle with methodical precision. "You should sleep," he said without looking up. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "What about you?" "I'll sleep, eventually." Clara climbed into bed but didn't close her eyes. She watched Ethan work in the firelight, his movements sure and practiced, wondered what he was thinking, whether he was as scared as she was, or whether years of war and solitude had burned that kind of fear out of him. "Ethan?" she said into the quiet. "Yeah? Thank you for all of this. For fighting when you didn't have to." His hand stilled on the rifle. "I did have to. That's what you're not understanding. The moment I took your hand in that town square, I made a choice. And I don't unmake my choices just because they get hard. Some people would. I'm not some people." He resumed cleaning the rifle. "Get some sleep, Clara. We leave at dawn." She closed her eyes and tried to find sleep, but it stayed elusive. Tomorrow they'd ride back to Coldwater. Tomorrow she'd stand in a courtroom and let strangers decide if she was property or person. Tomorrow everything could end. Or tomorrow could be the beginning of something new. She didn't know which possibility scared her more. Friday morning arrived with brutal cold and clear skies. They dressed in silence, Clara pulling on the one good dress she owned, the one Ethan had bought for her at the general store. It was simple brown wool, nothing fancy, but it fit properly and made her look less like a child playing dress-up. The ride to town felt both endless and too short. Clara's stomach churned with anxiety. She kept running through potential scenarios in her head, what Crow might say, what Brennan would argue, what the judge might decide. "Stop," Ethan said eventually. "Stop what?" "Planning for every possibility. You can't control what happens in there. You can only control how you respond." He kept his eyes on the road. "Brennan knows what he's doing. We have a solid case. Everything else is just noise." They reached Coldwater by 9:30 and found the courthouse already buzzing with activity. Word had spread. This wasn't just another dry legal proceeding. This was drama, entertainment, a story people would talk about for months. The crowd parted as they walked up the courthouse steps. Clara kept her head high, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. Ethan's hand found the small of her back, steadying. Inside, Brennan waited in the corridor outside the courtroom. He looked tired, but focused, his arms full of documents. "Good. You're early," he said. "We need to go over a few things before we go in. Crow's already here with his team. 3 lawyers total, all from the railroad's legal department." "3?" Clara's voice cracked. "How many do we have?" "Just me. But I'm worth at least 2 of theirs, so don't panic." Brennan tried for a smile. "Here's what's going to happen. Crow will present his case first. He's the plaintiff. He'll produce the indenture contract, explain how he acquired it, argue that it predates your marriage and therefore invalidates it. I'll cross-examine him, then we present our defense. You'll need to testify, Clara. Are you ready for that?" "I don't know." "Honest answer. Good." Brennan pulled out a pocket watch. 5 minutes. Use them to center yourself. Remember, tell the truth, keep your answers short and direct, and look at the judge when you speak. Don't let Crow's lawyers rattle you. The courtroom doors opened and people began filing in. Clara followed Ethan and Brennan inside, her legs unsteady. The courtroom was smaller than she'd expected. Wood-paneled walls, rows of benches for spectators, a raised platform where Judge Whitmore would sit. Crow stood at one of the 2 tables facing the judge's bench, flanked by his 3 lawyers, all men in expensive suits who looked like they'd never worked a hard day in their lives. Brennan led them to the opposite table. Clara sat between him and Ethan, acutely aware of every eye on her. The gallery was packed. She spotted Mrs. Hartwell in the front row, Pastor Morris beside her. Sheriff Dalton stood near the back, arms crossed. Even Jim Brennan from the hardware store was there, looking uncomfortable but curious. Judge Whitmore entered through a side door and everyone stood. He was older than Clara expected, maybe 70, with white hair and a face like weathered granite. He settled into his chair with the slow movements of arthritic joints and surveyed the room with sharp eyes. "Be seated," he said. His voice was stronger than his body suggested. "We're here for the matter of Crow versus Hale, regarding the contested status of one Clara Voss. Mr. Crow, you brought this suit. Present your case." Crow stood, smoothing his jacket. "Thank you, Your Honor. This is a simple matter of contract law. In March of this year, the Charitable Women's Workhouse of St. Louis entered into a loan agreement with Mountain West Railroad to cover operational debts. When the workhouse defaulted, the railroad legally acquired certain assets as collateral, including indentured service contracts for several residents. He produced a document and handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Whitmore. This is the indenture contract signed by Clara Voss on April 10, 1883. It clearly states that she agrees to provide labor for a period of 5 years to satisfy debts owed by the institution. The contract is signed, witnessed, and properly notarized. Clara's hands clenched under the table. April 10th. She remembered that day. Mrs. Anderson had called her into the office, told her she was leaving for Montana, had her mark an X on several papers, but she'd never explained what Clara was actually signing. Furthermore, Crow continued, Miss Voss absconded from her contracted obligations by entering into a fraudulent marriage without proper authorization. Montana territorial law requires that indentured persons obtain written permission before entering into marriage. She did not. Therefore, her marriage to Ethan Hale is void, and she remains legally bound to her original contract. He sat down looking satisfied. One of his lawyers stood and began reading from what sounded like legal precedents, cases where similar contracts had been upheld, where marriages had been annulled due to prior obligations. Clara felt the room closing in. It all sounded so official, so legitimate, like maybe she really was just property that had wandered off and needed to be returned. Then Brennan stood up. Your Honor, if I may. His voice cut through the droning lawyer. Mr. Crow's presentation sounds impressive. Unfortunately, it's built entirely on fraud. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Whitmore banged his gavel once. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Brennan. I hope you can back it up. I can, Your Honor. First, let's examine the circumstances under which this contract was allegedly signed. Clara Voss was 16 years old, a minor under Missouri law. She was living in an institution where she had no advocates, no legal counsel, and no understanding of what she was agreeing to. Brennan pulled out documents. I have affidavits from 3 other women who were in the workhouse at the same time. All of them describe Mrs. Anderson's practice of having residents sign papers without explanation, under threat of punishment if they refused. He handed the papers to the bailiff. Second, the contract itself is legally deficient. It fails to specify what type of labor Clara would perform, where she would perform it, or under what conditions. It doesn't include provisions for her safety, health, or basic welfare. It's essentially a blank check that could be used to justify any form of exploitation. Crow was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, this is speculation and hearsay. I'm not finished, Brennan said coldly. Third, Mr. Crow claims he legally acquired this contract when the workhouse defaulted on loans. I'd like him to produce documentation proving that transaction. Specifically, I want to see the original loan agreement, proof that the workhouse had legal authority to indenture its residents as collateral, and records showing that Clara was notified of this transfer of her contract to a third party. Crow's jaw tightened. Those documents exist and can be produced. Then produce them now. We'll wait. Silence fell. Crow exchanged glances with his lawyers. One of them leaned over and whispered something urgent. The documents are in St. Louis, Crow said finally. They can be retrieved within a week. A week? Brennan's voice dripped skepticism. Your Honor, Mr. Crow filed this claim 3 days ago, presumably after conducting due diligence on his case. Yet now he can't produce basic documentation proving he legally owns what he's trying to collect? That strikes me as highly suspicious. Judge Whitmore leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Mr. Crow, do you have any documentation present today that proves your legal acquisition of this contract? We have the contract itself, Your Honor, signed and witnessed. That proves Miss Voss signed something. It doesn't prove you have legal standing to enforce it. Whitmore's voice was dry. Mr. Brennan raises valid points. If you're going to claim ownership of another person's labor, you need to demonstrate an unbroken chain of legal authority. Crow's face flushed. Your Honor, with respect, this is a delaying tactic. Mr. Brennan is trying to ensure this court doesn't rubber stamp what might be legal slavery. Judge Whitmore's words fell like stones. And frankly, Mr. Crow, your inability to produce basic documentation makes me wonder if this claim is legitimate at all. The courtroom was dead silent now. Clara could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. However, Whitmore continued, I'm willing to give you time to produce what you claim exists. This hearing is continued for 2 weeks. You will provide complete documentation of your legal authority, or this case will be dismissed." "Your Honor," Crow started. 2 weeks, Mr. Crow? That's generous, considering you should have had this ready today." Whitmore looked at Brennan. "Do you have anything else?" "One thing, Your Honor. I'd like to call Clara Hale to testify." Clara's stomach dropped. Brennan had warned her this might happen, but hearing her name called in open court still made everything feel terrifyingly real. She stood on shaking legs and walked to the witness stand. The bailiff administered the oath, and she sat, hands gripping the armrests to keep them from trembling. Brennan approached with a gentle expression. "Mrs. Hale, can you tell the court about the day you signed this contract?" Clara swallowed hard. "Mrs. Anderson called me into her office. She said I was leaving for Montana, that a man had arranged for me to come west as his wife. She had me sign papers. I marked an X because I can't write my name properly, but she never explained what I was signing, just said it was travel documents." "Did anyone explain that you were entering into an indenture contract?" "No." "Did anyone tell you that you were signing away 5 years of your labor?" "No." "Did you understand that this document could be bought and sold like property?" "No, I thought—" Clara's voice broke. She took a breath and tried again. "I thought I was agreeing to travel arrangements for a marriage, that's all. I didn't know it meant I could be claimed as debt property." Brennan nodded. "One more question. In the 3 weeks you've lived with Ethan Hale, has he ever treated you as property, as something he owns?" Clara looked across the courtroom and found Ethan's eyes. He sat perfectly still, watching her with that steady gaze that had become familiar comfort. "No," she said firmly. "He's treated me like a person, like someone worth teaching and protecting and respecting. He's given me choices and dignity and a life I never thought I could have. He doesn't own me. Nobody owns me, and I'll fight anyone who tries to say different." The courtroom erupted. Judge Whitmore's gavel came down hard, demanding order. Through the chaos, Clara saw Crow's face twisted with rage, his lawyers frantically whispering, and she saw Ethan, still watching her, something that might have been pride in his eyes. Whitmore restored order and dismissed them, but the damage was done. Clara had spoken truth in front of the whole town, had claimed her own humanity in a way that couldn't be taken back. Whatever happened in 2 weeks, that moment would matter. They left the courthouse through a gauntlet of stares and whispers. Outside, Brennan caught up with them. "That was good," he said. "Really good. You gave Whitmore exactly what he needed to justify questioning Crow's claims." "Will he rule in our favor?" Ethan asked. "Maybe. If Crow can't produce solid documentation, Whitmore will have to dismiss. But 2 weeks is a long time. Crow might actually have papers that prove his case, or he might manufacture them." Brennan's expression was serious. "Watch yourselves. Desperate men do desperate things." They rode out of town in afternoon shadows, neither speaking. The mountain rose before them, dark with pine forest, promising isolation and safety. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just made themselves targets, that somewhere behind them, Victor Crow was planning his next move. And it wouldn't be in a courtroom. They were 3 miles from the cabin when Clara heard it, the distant crack of a branch that didn't sound like wind or wildlife. Ethan heard it too. His hand moved to the rifle without breaking stride, and Sadie's ears flicked back nervously. "How many?" Clara whispered. "Don't know yet. Could be nothing." But his voice said he didn't believe that. They continued up the mountain road, tension building with each turn. The forest pressed close on both sides, shadows deepening as the sun dropped toward the western peaks. Perfect terrain for an ambush. Another sound. Closer this time. Definitely footsteps. Ethan pulled Sadie to a stop and stood up in the wagon, scanning the tree line. "Show yourself," he called out. "I know you're there." Silence. Then Victor Crow stepped onto the road 50 yards ahead, flanked by 2 men Clara had never seen before. Both carried rifles held at casual angles that suggested they knew how to use them. "Mr. Hale," Crow said pleasantly. "Fancy meeting you here. This is private property. You're trespassing. Actually, I'm conducting legal business. I have questions about Miss Voss's whereabouts over the past month. Thought we might have a conversation about her employment situation." There's nothing to talk about. The judge said 2 weeks. You've got your deadline. The judge said a lot of things. Doesn't mean I have to wait patiently while you hide my property up in these mountains. Crow's smile was ice. See, I've been thinking. That hearing didn't go quite as planned. Your lawyer made some inconvenient points, asked for documentation that might take time to arrange properly. You mean forge, Claire said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. Crow's eyes shifted to her. Careful, girl. You're already in enough trouble without adding slander to your list of offenses. It's not slander if it's true. Claire stood up beside Ethan, refusing to cower. You don't have legitimate papers. That's why you couldn't produce them in court. You're hoping 2 weeks is enough time to manufacture them. Bold words for someone in your position. Crow took a step forward. His men did the same, rifles shifting to more ready positions. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to come with me right now, quietly. We'll get this sorted out in St. Louis where the proper authorities can review your contract. Mr. Hale can continue his lonely mountain life, and everyone gets what they want. No, Clara said. That wasn't a request. And that wasn't a no that needs explaining. She felt Ethan tense beside her, calculating distances and odds. I'm not going anywhere with you. Then I'll take you by force. Montana law allows for the recovery of indentured persons who've fled their obligations. Crow gestured to his men. These gentlemen are licensed recovery agents, everything legal and proper. Nothing about this is legal or proper, Ethan said quietly. And you're not taking her. You're outnumbered, Hale, 3-1. Don't be stupid. 3-2, Claire corrected. Her hand found the revolver Ethan had given her that morning, tucked into her coat pocket. She pulled it out and aimed it at Crow with both hands, the way Ethan had taught her. And I'm not afraid to use this. Crow actually laughed. You going to shoot me, girl? You can't even hold that thing steady. He was right. The gun shook in Clara's grip, but she kept it pointed at his chest anyway. Maybe not, but at this distance, even shaking, I'll hit something important. The standoff held for 3 heartbeats. Then one of Crow's men raised his rifle toward Clara. Everything happened fast. Ethan's rifle came up and fired in one smooth motion. The shot clipped the man's shoulder and he went down cursing. The second man swung his weapon toward Ethan, but Clara fired first, not at him, at the ground in front of his feet. Dirt exploded and his man jumped back, giving Ethan time to lever another round into the chamber. Next one goes center mass, Ethan said, his voice dead calm. Your choice. Crow's face had gone white. You just assaulted a legal recovery agent. That's a felony. You just threatened my wife with armed kidnapping. That's also a felony. Want to stand here arguing about who broke more laws? Or you want to get off my land before I decide you're a legitimate threat and act accordingly? The wounded man was clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Not life-threatening, but painful. His companion helped him up, both men backing away slowly. Crow didn't move. This isn't over. Yes, it is. A new voice cut through the tension. Margaret Sloane stepped out of the trees behind Crow, holding a leather satchel. It's very over, Mr. Crow, because I have something you really don't want seen in court. Crow spun. What are you doing here? Making sure justice actually happens for once. Margaret opened the satchel and pulled out a thick file. Remember how I used to keep your books? How I filed all your correspondence and contracts? I kept copies of everything. The color drained from Crow's face. I have your letters to Mrs. Anderson, negotiating prices for indentured women like they were livestock. I have records of kickbacks you paid to judges in 3 different territories. I have documentation of 14 cases where you falsified contracts to increase their value. Margaret's voice was steel. I've been gathering this for a year, waiting for the right moment. Congratulations. This is that moment. Those are stolen documents. Inadmissible in court. Maybe, but they're not inadmissible in newspapers. The Denver Post would love this story. So would the territorial governor. Want to bet whether the railroad keeps protecting you once this becomes a public scandal? Crow's jaw worked. He looked at his wounded man, at Ethan's rifle still trained on him, at Clara standing tall with her shaking gun. Finally, his eyes settled on Margaret. What do you want? I want you to withdraw your claim against Clara Voss. Immediately. In writing. and I want you to leave Montana and never come back. That's extortion. That's justice, the kind you've avoided for too long." Margaret pulled out a piece of paper and a pen. "Write it now, or I walk this file straight to Judge Whitmore's office, then to the telegraph station, then to every newspaper between here and San Francisco." For a long moment, Crow didn't move. Clara could see him calculating, trying to find an angle, but there wasn't one. He was cornered, and he knew it. He snatched the paper and pen and wrote quickly, his handwriting angry slashes across the page. When he finished, he threw it at Margaret's feet. "You'll regret this," he said. "No, I really won't." Margaret picked up the paper and examined it. "This formally withdraws your claim against Clara Voss and acknowledges that you have no legal standing to pursue her further. Signed and dated." She folded it carefully and put it in the satchel. "Now get off this mountain before I change my mind about letting you leave intact." Crow and his men left, the wounded one still cursing under his breath. They disappeared down the trail and the forest swallowed them. Clara's legs gave out and she sat down hard on the wagon bench. The gun slipped from her nerveless fingers. Her whole body was shaking now, adrenaline flooding out in a dizzy rush. Ethan caught the gun before it could fall and checked the chamber. "You fired once. Good instinct." "I wasn't trying to hit him. I was trying not to throw up." "Close enough." He helped her back to standing. "Margaret, hell of a timing." Margaret climbed into the back of their wagon without invitation. "Been following Crow since yesterday. Figured he'd try something after that hearing went sideways. Man's too arrogant to accept losing in court." "How'd you know where we'd be?" "I didn't. Got lucky." Margaret settled against a supply crate. "Can we have this conversation at your cabin? I'm freezing and I haven't eaten since dawn." Ethan didn't argue. He got Sadie moving again, and they covered the last miles in tense silence, everyone watching the tree line for more threats. The cabin looked small and vulnerable when they arrived, lamplight glowing warm in the windows from the fire Clara had banked that morning. Ethan helped both women down and secured Sadie in the lean-to while Clara started coffee and put together a quick meal from their stores. Margaret sat at the table and spread out her documents like evidence at a trial. "I've been building this case for 14 months. Every piece of paper Crow ever signed that showed his real business. He wasn't just collecting legitimate debts. He was creating them. Buying up questionable contracts, then using forged documentation to inflate their value and extract maximum payment from desperate people." "Why didn't you go to the authorities before?" Clara asked. "I did. 3 times. Every time, the railroad's lawyers buried it. Judges looked the other way. Sheriffs said it wasn't their jurisdiction." Margaret's voice was bitter. "Nobody cares about orphans and immigrants and poor women who get caught in these schemes. They're invisible." "You could have stayed invisible too," Ethan pointed out. "Why risk this now?" "Because I was tired of being invisible, tired of watching him win." Margaret looked at Clara. "And because you stood up in that courtroom and claimed your humanity in front of everyone. That took courage, real courage. I figured the least I could do was back it up with evidence." Clara felt her throat tighten. "What you did today, confronting Crow with those files, that was dangerous. So was standing up to him with a shaking gun." Margaret smiled. "We all do what we have to do." They ate together, the 3 of them, talking through what came next. Margaret would take Crow's written withdrawal to Judge Whitmore first thing Monday morning. Brennan would file motions to make it official. The case would be dismissed. "What about the documents?" Clara asked. "The evidence against Crow, what happens to that?" "I'll hold on to it, insurance in case he ever tries to come back." Margaret stood and stretched. "I should go. Got a room in town and I'd like to get there before full dark." "Stay tonight," Clara said impulsively. "It's too dangerous riding down alone. You can leave at first light." Margaret looked surprised, then touched. "You sure? It's a small cabin. We'll make it work. You did us a favor we can never repay. Least we can do is offer you a warm bed and breakfast." So Margaret stayed. They gave her the bed while Clara and Ethan made pallets on the floor near the fire. It was cramped and awkward, but it felt right somehow. 3 people who'd all been fighting the same battle, finally able to rest. Margaret left at dawn with a packet of food, and Clara's thanks still ringing in the cold morning air. Ethan watched her ride down the mountain trail until she disappeared into the trees. She's going to make a lot of enemies with those files, he said. She already had enemies. Now she's got ammunition to fight back. Clara stood beside him, watching morning light paint the snow gold. You think Crow will really leave? He doesn't have a choice. Margaret called his bluff and proved he's a fraud. If he stays and fights, he'll lose everything. His job, his reputation, possibly his freedom. Ethan turned back toward the cabin. He's done. We won. The words should have brought relief, victory, joy. Instead, Clara felt strangely hollow. What's wrong? Ethan asked, reading her expression. I don't know. I thought winning would feel different, more complete. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. But now what? We go back to normal? Pretend none of this happened? We can't pretend it didn't happen. It changed things. How? Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his breath misting in the cold. Come with me. I want to show you something. He led her into the forest, following a path she'd walked dozens of times while hauling water. But instead of stopping at the spring, he kept going, climbing higher through snow-covered pines. Clara followed without question, trusting him to have a destination. After 20 minutes, they broke through the tree line onto a rocky outcrop that overlooked the entire valley. Mountains rolled away in every direction, their peaks sharp against the morning sky. The view was staggering, miles and miles of untouched wilderness, beautiful and brutal and endless. I come here sometimes, Ethan said, when I need to think, to remember why I chose this life. Clara stood beside him, taking it all in. It's incredible. It's lonely. That's what I told myself for 12 years, that lonely was the same as peaceful, that isolation was freedom. He turned to face her. Then you showed up and proved me wrong. Clara's heart started beating faster. You made noise where there was silence, asked questions when I'd forgotten how to have conversations, forced me to see that maybe I wasn't choosing solitude, maybe I was just hiding from the possibility of being hurt again. Ethan's voice was rough. These past few weeks, teaching you, watching you grow stronger, standing beside you through all this mess, it reminded me what it feels like to have someone to fight for, someone who fights back. Ethan, let me finish. He took a breath. I know this started as a business arrangement. I know I promised you it would never be more than that. But things change. People change. And I've changed enough to know that I don't want you here just because of a legal contract or because you're useful with chores. Then why? Because you're brave and stubborn and you don't quit even when everything's stacked against you. Because you look at these mountains and see beauty instead of prison. Because you stood in that courtroom and claimed your own worth when most people would have just accepted what they were told. Ethan's eyes were steady on hers. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being my hired help and started being my partner, my equal. And if you'll have me, really have me, not as some arrangement but as something real, I'd like to try being a proper husband, the kind who earns the title instead of just buying it. Clara couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The cold mountain air felt sharp in her lungs. You don't have to answer now, Ethan added quickly. I know this is sudden. I know you've been through hell and probably need time to... Yes, Clara interrupted. Yes? Yes, I'll have you. Really have you. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. I didn't want to hope for this. Didn't want to risk believing you could see me as anything except that fat, scared girl who fell off the stagecoach. But you never looked at me that way. Not once. You saw something I couldn't see in myself. I saw what was already there, just buried under years of other people telling you who you were. And who am I? Strong, capable, worth fighting for. Ethan's hand came up to cup her face, his rough palm warm against her cold cheek. Worth choosing every single day. He kissed her then, tentative and careful, like he was afraid she might break. Clara kissed him back with all the emotion she'd been holding inside, gratitude and fear and hope and something that felt dangerously close to love. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, the sun had risen fully above the eastern peaks. We should get back, Ethan said. Still got work to do. Clara laughed, the sound bright and surprised. Always work to do. That's mountain life, but Now we do it together. Really together. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, picking their way carefully through snow and rock. At the door, Ethan stopped. "One more thing," he said. "In spring, when the pass clears, we're going to town. I'm buying you a proper wedding ring, maybe even arranging a real ceremony if you want one. Something that's ours, not just legal paperwork. I don't need a ceremony. Maybe not. But you deserve one. You deserve a choice made in celebration instead of desperation." Ethan squeezed her hand. "We started this backwards. Let's do at least one part the right way." Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Monday morning came too soon. They rode back to Coldwater together, Margaret's withdrawal document and Brennan's legal papers tucked safely in Ethan's coat. The town looked different now, less hostile, more wary. Word had spread about what happened on the mountain, about Margaret's confrontation with Crow, about the documents that proved he was a fraud. Judge Whitmore's chambers were quiet when they arrived. The judge read through the withdrawal carefully, then looked up with something that might have been approval. "Mr. Crow has officially withdrawn all claims against Mrs. Hale," he said. "The case is dismissed with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. Your marriage stands as legal and binding." "That's it?" Clara asked. "That's it." Whitmore leaned back in his chair. "Though I'll say this, what you did, standing up in that courtroom and speaking truth, that took courage. Changed how I see these cases. Made me realize I've been too quick to accept claims at face value without digging deeper." "Will you dig deeper now?" Ethan asked. "I will. And I've sent word to the territorial governor about Crow's practices. There's going to be an investigation into the railroad's debt collection methods. Other people trapped in similar situations might finally get justice." Clara felt something release in her chest. "Because of us? Because of you speaking up? Because of Miss Sloane having the courage to preserve evidence? Because sometimes one person standing firm is all it takes to start things changing." Whitmore stood and extended his hand. "Congratulations, Mrs. Hale. You're free." Free. The word echoed in Clara's mind as they left the courthouse. Free to choose her life, free to build something real with Ethan, free from fear and contracts and people who saw her as property. They stopped by Brennan's office to settle the final bill. The lawyer waved off half of what they owed. "You paid enough," he said. "Besides, this case got me thinking about other people in similar situations. Might take on some pro bono work, see if I can help others caught in these schemes." "Because of us?" Clara asked again. "Because watching you fight reminded me why I became a lawyer in the first place. To help people who can't help themselves. To stand up against power when it's being abused." Brennan smiled. "So thank you for reminding me what matters." In the general store, Mrs. Hartwell was actually civil, almost friendly. She didn't apologize for her earlier behavior, but she loaded their supplies with care instead of contempt. "Heard what happened on the mountain," she said as she tallied their bill. "Heard about that Crow fellow being a fraud. Guess we all jumped to conclusions." "People usually do," Clara said quietly. "Well, for what it's worth, you've proven yourself. Anyone who stands up to the railroad like that has spine." Mrs. Hartwell handed over their change. "You need anything else, you let me know." It wasn't much, but it was something. They left town in afternoon light, the wagon loaded with supplies and good news. Spring would come eventually, the snow would melt, life would return to the mountain, and they'd be here to meet it, together. "You know what I realized?" Claire said as they climbed toward home. "What?" "That day in town when you took my hand in front of everyone, that wasn't just you saving me. It was you giving me the space to save myself. To become someone who could fight back." Ethan glanced at her. "You would have found your way to that person eventually. I just accelerated the timeline. No. Without you, I would have stayed invisible. Would have let people define me my whole life. You saw me when nobody else did. That matters, Ethan. It matters more than you know." "Then we're even. Because you saw something in me too. Saw past the grumpy hermit to someone who still had capacity for connection. For partnership. For something that feels a lot like happiness." They rode in comfortable silence, watching the forest pass by. Clara's mind drifted to the future, real future now, not just survival. Spring planting, summer hunting, fall harvest. Another winter, but this time with certainty and choice. Maybe children someday, if they were lucky. A family built on respect and work and honest affection instead of romance and pretty lies. Maybe neighbors, if word spread that the mountain wasn't as isolated as everyone thought. Maybe a life that became something more than just getting by. The cabin appeared through the trees, smoke rising from the chimney where they'd banked the morning fire. Clara had never been so happy to see 4 log walls and a stone chimney in her life. Home. Real home. Chosen home. Ethan helped her down from the wagon, and they stood together in the dooryard, looking at the small structure that had become their whole world. "Thank you," Clara said, "for everything. For choosing me when you didn't have to. For fighting when it would have been easier to walk away. For seeing worth in me before I could see it myself. Thank you for making these mountains feel less lonely. For working yourself half to death learning things that didn't come easy. For being brave when you were terrified." Ethan pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. "For choosing this life. For choosing me." Clara leaned into his warmth, feeling the solid reality of him against her. 4 months ago, she'd been nobody, going nowhere, with no hope for anything better. Now she was somebody's wife, somebody's partner, somebody who'd stood up in a courtroom and claimed her own humanity. That scared 16-year-old girl who'd stepped off the stagecoach was still inside her somewhere, would probably always be there, carrying the scars of everything that came before. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She'd grown into someone stronger, someone who could face down railroad lawyers and mountain winters and her own deep-seated belief that she didn't deserve good things. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Sadie snorted in the lean-to, restless. Wind picked up, carrying the promise of more snow. But inside the cabin, the fire would burn warm, coffee would brew, dinner would be simple but filling. And 2 people who'd started as strangers, bound by nothing except desperation and paperwork, would continue building something real. Not perfect, never perfect, but honest, and chosen. And theirs. Clara pulled back enough to look up at Ethan's weathered face. "I love you," she said. The words came out shy, but certain. "I know we didn't start with love, but I think we got there anyway." Ethan's expression softened into something that transformed his whole face. "I love you too. Didn't plan on it, didn't see it coming, but here we are." "Here we are," Clara agreed. And there they stayed, 2 outcasts who'd found each other at the worst possible time, in the worst possible way, and somehow built the best possible life. Not because it was easy, but because when it mattered most, neither of them had chosen easy. They'd chosen right. They'd chosen each other, and that made all the difference, but the end.